The galaxy was a place of constant turmoil. Wars raged between species, and alliances shifted as quickly as the stars moved in the sky. But Jason Kane wasn't concerned with any of that. He was a smuggler, a rogue, a man who made his living by slipping through the cracks of the galaxy's great conflicts. He had no loyalty to any government, no love for the endless power struggles. All Jason cared about was survival. And right now, survival meant finding a way off Zerath 9, a desolate prison planet ruled by the Dracul. Zerath 9 was a place few people dared to talk about. It was a hellish world, filled with criminals, outcasts, and enemies of the state, those deemed unworthy of life by the Dracul. They were a brutal, cold-blooded reptilian race who had conquered this planet and turned it into their own personal prison. It was a world where only the strong survived, where every day was a battle for your life. Jason had found himself on Zerath 9, not by accident, but because he had a job to do. It had seemed simple enough. Pick up a cargo, deliver it, and be on his way. But in the chaos of the prison world, things never went as planned. He had been caught, imprisoned, and thrown into the depths of Zerath 9's brutal system. However, there was one thing Jason had learned over the years of being a smuggler and a thief: never stay put for too long. He'd gathered enough information to know that there was a way out if he could make the right deal. And that's how he found himself in the depths of the prison, sneaking through its darkened corridors under the guise of a maintenance worker. He had one mission: break out Ari Lenya, a girl who was not just any prisoner. She was a princess, a member of the Alari, a species of great power and beauty. Jason had heard whispers about her during his time on the planet. She wasn't just anyone. Ari Lenya was a living symbol of hope, a symbol the Dracul had taken as a trophy. They'd captured her during a raid on her homeworld, keeping her locked away in the deepest cell beneath the prison. Her presence on Zerath 9 was a constant reminder of the Dracul's dominance over the galaxy. Jason wasn't sure why he had agreed to the mission. Maybe it was the money. Maybe it was the challenge. Or maybe it was because, for the first time, in a long time, he felt something beyond the usual indifference that defined his life. He didn't know. All he knew was that he couldn't leave her there. He didn't know who she was at first. He hadn't seen the pictures of the princess that were spread across the galaxy. He just saw a girl who was chained, broken, but still alive. She had something in her eyes that set her apart from everyone else on Zerath 9. Hope. He reached her cell in the depths of the prison, moving as quietly as he could through the maze of corridors. The place stank of sweat, blood, and fear. The air was thick with the weight of hundreds of prisoners who had given up hope long ago. Guards paced up and down the hall, their footsteps echoing in the silence. But Jason knew how to move without being seen. He had done it countless times before, dodging security and making his way through dangerous places. When he finally reached the cell, he took a deep breath. The door to her cell was reinforced. Metal bars that were more than capable of holding any prisoner. But Jason wasn't concerned with the door. He had come prepared. With a small device from his belt, he hacked into the prison's security system and unlocked the door. The metal grated as it slid open, and Jason stepped inside. At first, Ari Lenya didn't move. She just sat there, her glowing blue skin contrasting against the dark, cold walls. Her eyes, gold and intense, lifted slowly to meet his gaze. She didn't flinch, didn't gasp in surprise as Jason had expected. Instead, she stared at him, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "You are not one of them," she said, her voice calm, though laced with a quiet strength. Jason nodded, giving her a small, reassuring smile. "No, I'm the guy who's here to get you out." There was no reaction from her face, but her eyes softened just a little. It was as if, for the first time since her capture, someone had spoken to her as if she were more than just a prisoner. For a long moment, she said, Nothing, simply studying him. Jason's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't break eye contact. This wasn't just about breaking out a prisoner. This wasn't just another job. There was something about her, something different. He could see it now, her strength. She wasn't just a helpless victim. She had a purpose, even locked away in this hellish prison. Finally, she spoke again. "I will follow you." The words were simple, but Jason could feel the weight of them. She wasn't asking for help. She was accepting it. She had made the choice to trust him, and that meant everything. Without another word, Jason moved quickly, cutting through the chains that bound her to the wall. She stood up, her movements fluid and graceful despite the confinement she'd endured for so long. They moved silently through the hallways. Arilenia was like a shadow beside him, her glowing skin blending with the darkness of the prison. The further they went, the more Jason could feel the tension building in the air. They had to move quickly. The Dracul would notice her missing soon enough. They reached the first checkpoint where a guard was posted. Jason's pulse quickened, but Arilenia reached out, her hand glowing faintly. Without warning, a pulse of energy shot through the air, freezing the guard in place. Jason took a step back, amazed by her power. It wasn't just her beauty. This alien princess was a force to be reckoned with. "Come on," Jason whispered, pulling her forward. "We've got to keep moving." They ran, and with every step, Jason felt a sense of urgency. They were so close, but every second felt like an eternity. Behind them, the alarms began to blare, echoing through the prison. Jason didn't stop. Neither did Arilenia. Together they were unstoppable. The alarms had blared to life, cutting through the silence of the prison like a blade. Jason's heart pounded in his chest as he grabbed Arilenia's hand, urging her forward. The Dracul were known for their efficiency, and it wouldn't take long before every guard in the prison realized the princess had escaped. Jason had to keep moving, had to get them out of this hellhole, or everything he'd done so far would be for nothing. They moved quickly, slipping through corridors filled with shadow and whispers. Jason had spent years in places like this, studying every possible exit, every maintenance shaft, every hidden passageway. But this time, it felt different. The urgency in Arilenia's eyes pushed him to move faster. Her trust in him made every step feel heavier, as though the weight of her freedom rested on his shoulders. Behind them, the footsteps of the Dracul guards echoed, growing louder as they realized what had happened. Jason didn't look back. His focus was on the path ahead. He knew that if they didn't reach the transport bay soon, they would be surrounded, trapped. It wasn't just the Dracul they had to outrun. It was the fate of the galaxy itself. Arilenia wasn't just another prisoner. She was the key to ending the Dracul's reign of terror. If they could get her to safety, if they could return her to her people, the balance of power in the galaxy could shift. But if they failed, Zerath 9 would become their tomb, and the Aleri would lose their only hope. Jason led her down a narrow hallway, the low hum of the prison's power systems vibrating underfoot. The walls felt like they were closing in, but he didn't stop. The landing bay wasn't far now. They had to reach the shuttle, get off the planet before the Dracul's reinforcements arrived. His mind raced as he calculated their next move. The guards were closing in, but there was a way. There had to be. They turned a corner and came face to face with a group of Dracul soldiers. The sight of the reptilian creatures, their yellow eyes gleaming with fury, stopped them dead in their tracks. Jason's breath caught in his throat. There were too many of them, at least 5, armed with heavy weapons, standing between them, and the only way out. The soldiers sneered, their thick jaws pulling back in a snarl. Jason's fingers tightened around the handle of the blaster hidden at his side. He had no choice but to fight. "Move, human," one of the Dracul hissed, their voice a deep growl. "The princess stays with us." Jason's mind raced. He couldn't fight his way out of this, not with Arilenia's life on the line. He had to think fast. Had to do something unexpected. The blaster in his hand felt heavy, but it wasn't the answer. Before he could make a move, Ari Lenya stepped forward. Her calm gaze never wavered as she raised her hand, a soft light beginning to glow at her fingertips. Jason froze. He had seen her power before. Fleeting, quick bursts of energy that knocked out guards. But this was different. This time the air itself seemed to shudder as the power in her grew. The Dracul hesitated. They had no idea what they were dealing with. Ari Lenya's power was ancient, a gift passed down through her people for generations. It wasn't just physical strength, it was a connection to the very essence of life itself. She could manipulate energy, bend it to her will. And now, standing between her and the Dracul soldiers, she was ready to unleash it. With a swift motion, Ari Lenya's hand shot out, releasing a pulse of energy so strong that it sent a wave of force through the air. The Dracul soldiers were thrown backward, crashing into the walls with a force that left them stunned. For a moment, everything was silent. The only sound was the hum of the prison's machinery. Jason couldn't believe his eyes. The soldiers were disoriented, struggling to get back on their feet, but Ari Lenya wasn't finished. She stepped forward again, her eyes glowing brighter, her voice low and steady. "Stay down, or you will never rise again." The Dracul didn't move. They couldn't. Ari Lenya's power held them in place, and the fear in their eyes was enough to make even the bravest warrior hesitate. Jason blinked, trying to process what had just happened. He had seen the Alari fight before, but never like this. Ari Lenya wasn't just a princess. She was a force of nature, a weapon in her own right. With the soldiers incapacitated, Jason grabbed her hand and tugged her forward. They didn't stop to check if the guards were getting back up. There wasn't time. They had to get to the shuttle, and they had to do it fast. They kept running, through more dark corridors and tighter hallways, the alarm still blaring in the distance, warning everyone that the escape was in motion. Jason's legs burned with exhaustion. But he didn't stop. Not with Ari Lenya beside him. She was a beacon of strength, her every step filled with purpose. And despite everything that had happened, despite the chaos, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that he was witnessing something incredible. A princess, a prisoner, but now also a force that could change the future. Finally, they reached the landing bay. The bay was a vast, cavernous space filled with empty ships, their cold metal hulls glinting in the dim light. Jason didn't pause. He knew where the shuttle was parked. He could see it, just ahead. A small, stolen ship, barely enough to hold them both, but it was all they had. All they needed. But as Jason started toward the ship, something caught his eye. Movement. More Dracul soldiers. Dozens of them. The landing bay was crawling with them. They had been waiting for this. They knew the escape was happening, and they were ready to stop it. The sight of the reinforcements sent a wave of dread through Jason's chest. There was no way they could fight their way through all of them. The shuttle was too far, and the soldiers were too many. Jason's mind raced. His options were running out, but he couldn't stop now, not when they were so close. He turned to Ari Lenya, his voice low but urgent. "We need a way out, now." Ari Lenya met his gaze, her golden eyes calm. She wasn't scared. She never was. "I have one chance," she said softly, her voice steady. "Get us to the shuttle. I will take care of the rest." Jason didn't ask questions. He trusted her. He had no choice. Together they moved toward the ship, pushing through the sea of soldiers, relying on their wits, their strength, and most of all, Ari Lenya's power. They were close. So close. The air inside the shuttle bay hummed with the low drone of the ship's engines, barely audible over the chaotic sounds of battle that erupted all around them. Jason could feel his heart racing, his breath quickening as the enemy soldiers closed. "Arts!" Ari Lenya's grip on his hand tightened, her steps steady despite the overwhelming odds they faced. They were so close to freedom, just a few more steps, and the shuttle would be within their reach. But the Dracul were everywhere, crawling through the shadows like a storm of predators closing in on their prey. Jason knew that every second counted. They had reached the shuttle's landing area, but the sight before them was anything but comforting. The landing bay was a maze of metallic structures and crates, a perfect setting for the Dracul to make their move. As Jason scanned the room, he spotted several Dracul soldiers spread out in strategic positions. They were surrounding the shuttle. The ship wasn't large, and its entry point was clearly visible. No way they could simply run for it without being seen. And yet, Jason's instincts told him that time had run out for hesitation. There was no turning back. Without warning, Arilenia stepped forward, her eyes focused and intense. She knew what she had to do, and Jason didn't try to stop her. He had learned in these past days to trust her, to trust the power she wielded. Arilenia's gift wasn't just a weapon, it was a force. The energy that hummed around her seemed to pulse with life, with purpose. But as Jason watched her prepare, he realized just how dangerous it was for her to exert herself now. She had already used much of her strength to get them this far. This last move could either secure their escape or seal their fate. Arilenia stood tall, her voice soft but unwavering. "Stay close, Jason. No matter what, don't falter. We can't afford to lose focus." Jason nodded, his mind racing as his gaze flicked from the soldiers to the shuttle. He didn't know what exactly she planned, but he had no doubt that it would be nothing short of extraordinary. He saw her hand rise slightly, her fingers glowing with the faintest light, a signal that she was preparing to unleash her power. The room seemed to freeze around them as a deep, powerful energy built in the air. For a moment, all Jason could hear was the thumping of his own heartbeat, and then, with a movement so swift that it was almost imperceptible, Arilenia struck. A wave of force emanated from her outstretched hand, cutting through the air like a blade. The Dracul soldiers closest to them were thrown back violently, crashing into crates and the walls of the bay with a deafening crash. The shockwave was powerful enough to reverberate through the entire room, knocking several other soldiers off their feet. Jason could see the stunned expressions on their faces as they struggled to regain their footing. But the princess wasn't finished. With another swift gesture, Arilenia focused her energy into a concentrated blast. It hit the nearest soldier, sending him flying backward, his body slamming into the metal flooring with a sickening crunch. Jason felt a surge of awe at the raw power Arilenia commanded. It was overwhelming, unlike anything he had ever witnessed. In that moment, she wasn't just a princess. She was the embodiment of vengeance and freedom, wielding the very forces that could tear down the walls of the Dracul Empire. But the Dracul weren't done yet. They rallied quickly, their instinct for survival kicking in. More soldiers emerged. From the shadows, their weapons drawn, their reptilian eyes narrowed in fury. They weren't going to let her leave, not without a fight. Jason's grip tightened on the blaster at his side, ready to do whatever was necessary to protect Arilenia, to ensure that they both escaped alive. But Arilenia seemed to already know what was coming. She wasn't afraid. "Jason, keep moving. I will hold them off," Arilenia said calmly, her voice carrying an authority that Jason couldn't ignore. Jason hesitated for a fraction of a second, but then he nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. There was no time to waste. He sprinted toward the shuttle, his legs pumping as fast as they could go. Every step seemed like an eternity, the thundering sound of the Dracul soldiers' approach echoing in his ears. He could feel their presence behind him, but he refused to look back. He had to get to the shuttle, had to get the ship ready for takeoff. If they didn't leave soon, the Dracul would bring more reinforcements, and then they would be trapped. The shuttle's ramp stood open, just a few more meters away. Jason's breath came in ragged gasps as he reached it, jumping up the few steps to the interior of the ship. He didn't pause to catch his breath. Instead, He turned to check on Arilenia, his eyes scanning the space outside the shuttle. She was still there, her back straight, her power radiating from her in waves. The Dracul were advancing, but Arilenia was standing her ground, her hands raised, her body glowing with an otherworldly energy. Jason's fingers flew over the controls, activating the engines and preparing the ship for takeoff. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. The ramp began to retract as the engines hummed louder, the ship preparing to lift off. Jason's heart raced. He glanced out the window, his eyes searching for Arilenia. She was still holding her ground, her energy flaring with each pulse of power. But the Dracul were closing in, and Jason's stomach churned with fear. If she didn't make it to the ship soon, they would be trapped. In a final act of defiance, Arilenia released one last burst of energy, a pulse that sent shockwaves through the landing bay. The Dracul soldiers flinched, some of them stumbling backward momentarily. Dazed, it was enough. Arilenia used the moment to sprint toward the shuttle, her movements swift and graceful as she leaped up the ramp just as it was about to close. Jason's relief was palpable, but there was no time to celebrate. The shuttle's engines roared to life, and with a sudden jolt, the ship shot into the air, breaking free from the gravitational pull of Zerath 9. The Dracul's roar of frustration echoed in their ears as they soared into the sky, the planet shrinking beneath them. As they left the hostile world behind, Jason looked over at Arilenia. Her face was still calm, but there was a deep exhaustion in her eyes. She had pushed herself to the limit, and Jason knew that the worst was still yet to come. They weren't safe, not yet. But for the first time in a long while, Jason allowed himself to believe that there was hope. The journey ahead would be perilous, but with Arilenia by his side, anything seemed possible. As the ship soared through the atmosphere of Zerath 9, Jason's thoughts raced. The escape had been nothing short of miraculous, but the danger wasn't over. They had left the Dracul's grasp behind, but the galaxy was vast, filled with enemies, and their foes weren't so easily shaken off. Jason kept his eyes trained on the control panel, his hands steady as he guided the ship toward open space. The stars outside twinkled, offering a small but significant reassurance. Yet, deep within, an unshakable feeling of uncertainty gnawed at him. They had no destination, no clear plan, only a single truth. They had to keep moving. Arilenia remained silent, leaning against the bulkhead, her expression distant, almost lost in thought. Jason couldn't help but glance at her, his gaze lingering on the way her hair shifted in the artificial gravity. Despite her extraordinary power, despite her confidence, there was a vulnerability in her eyes that betrayed her inner exhaustion. He understood more than ever just how much she had given of herself. The energy she had expended in that final moment of the battle had drained her. Jason knew that much of her strength had been pushed to the limit, and yet, there was an underlying fire in her, a fire that would burn until the galaxy itself bent to her will. He could hear her soft breathing as she approached the cockpit, her presence a quiet reminder of the journey ahead. Arilenia's voice broke the silence, calm, yet with a certain edge. "Where do we go from here, Jason?" Her question echoed in Jason's mind, and for the first time since they had escaped, he didn't have an answer. They had no allies, no safe havens in this part of the galaxy. Only the unknown lay ahead. He ran a hand through his hair, uncertainty clouding his thoughts. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "But I can't turn back. We can't turn back." She nodded, her eyes glinting with a mixture of understanding and resolve. "I didn't expect you to." There was a certain calmness to her voice that Jason had grown to admire, even in the midst of the storm. She had an unwavering confidence, not in herself alone, but in the bond they had forged during their escape. Together, they were stronger than any enemy. But even then, The weight of their situation loomed large. As they entered deeper into space, Jason's thoughts returned to the Dracul, the reptilian warriors who had terrorized so many worlds, including his own, would not give up easily. The mere fact that Arilenia had managed to escape alive was a feat that seemed impossible. She had dealt with a dozen of them at once, single-handedly taking on their soldiers. Jason had seen it firsthand. The raw power she wielded was awe-inspiring, but it also came with a cost. Arilenia had to rest, to recover, and they needed to find a place where they could regroup and plan their next move. "There's a place," Arilenia spoke again, almost as if she had read his thoughts. "A hidden sanctuary. It's far away from the known systems, a place where the Dracul can't reach us for a while. It's not much, but it will give us the time we need." Jason turned to her, curiosity piqued. "Where is it?" Her gaze shifted to the view of space beyond, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if she were considering how much to reveal. "It's called Vathar," she said softly. "It's a moon orbiting a gas giant. Only a few beings know about it, and fewer still are willing to venture there. It's a place of refuge for those who need to disappear." Jason felt a spark of hope flicker within him. A sanctuary. Maybe it wasn't the final solution, but it was a chance, a way to slow down, catch their breath, and make some plans. "Sounds like a place we could use," he agreed, punching in the coordinates that Arilenia gave him. The ship's engines hummed softly as it adjusted course, its sleek design cutting through the vastness of space, a tiny speck among the infinite stars. The trip to Vathar was long, but not uneventful. During the quiet stretches, Jason found himself thinking about how much had changed in such a short amount of time. He had been a soldier, a man trying to survive in a galaxy filled with warfare. He had no idea that one encounter with an alien, Princess, would throw him into a conflict far bigger than any he had imagined. Arilenia had become something more than a leader to him. She was a symbol of everything he had ever hoped for, a chance for a better future. Despite the terrifying enemies they faced, despite the obstacles, she represented the possibility of change, and he had risked everything to help her. But that thought didn't sit well with him. Risking everything didn't mean it was guaranteed to pay off. He had been willing to die for her, and now the real question lingered. Was it worth it? The galaxy was vast, and as he stared into the starry expanse, Jason realized that the battle was far from over. The Dracul would stop at nothing to hunt them down, and their enemies would be relentless. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the ship approached Vathar. The moon was a rocky place, its surface marked with jagged mountains and deep valleys, not the kind of place one would call hospitable. Yet, in its isolation, it offered protection. Jason set the ship down on a relatively flat area near the moon's dark side, away from the potential gaze of any Dracul scout ships. As the ship's engines powered down, Jason turned to Arilenia. She was already on her feet, her eyes scanning the surroundings. "This is it," she said. "We're safe for now, but we need to move quickly. The sanctuary is hidden deep in the valley." Together, they disembarked from the ship, the cold of the moon's surface biting at their skin as they made their way toward the hidden refuge. The silence of the place was unnerving. There was no sound, no life, just the deep echo of their footsteps on the rocky ground. Jason couldn't help but feel the weight of their situation pressing down on him. They had made it here, but the journey ahead would be even more dangerous. The Dracul would not forget their defeat easily. They would hunt them relentlessly. But for now, they had time. Time to rest, time to plan. And that was all they needed. As they made their way toward the entrance of the sanctuary, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that their true test was only just beginning.